You didn't announce it. You didn't make a dramatic post. You didn't send a final paragraph. You didn't even need to, because the moment you outgrow an avoidant, something inside you shifts so deeply that your entire presence changes, and they can feel it without you saying a word. That's what people don't understand. They think power is loud. They think closure is a speech. They think healing is proving you're over it. But the most undeniable form of growth is quiet. It's the silence that doesn't beg. It's the calm that doesn't chase. It's the energy that doesn't explain itself anymore. When you were still hooked, your energy had a specific taste to it. It tasted like availability. It tasted like hoping. It tasted like checking your phone too often. It tasted like replaying conversations and rewriting messages in your head. It tasted like forgiveness that arrived faster than respect. It tasted like shrinking your needs so the relationship could survive. It tasted like trying to be easy, so they wouldn't run. And an avoidant nervous system recognizes that taste. Not because they're calculating, but because they can feel when someone is still orbiting them emotionally. When you're still hooked, there's a pull they can rely on. They can step back and you will lean in. They can go cold and you will warm it back up. They can disappear and you will make room for their return. That predictable pull becomes the invisible structure of the relationship, but then you outgrow it. And what changes first is not your feelings, it's your reflex. Your reflex used to be to explain, to reach, to fix, to soothe, to send one more message that might finally make them understand. Your reflex used to be to negotiate with silence like silence was a person you could reason with. Your reflex used to be to hold space for behavior that was hurting you because you believed love meant endurance. And now, your reflex is different. Now you pause. Now you breathe. Now you stop. Now you don't abandon yourself just to keep a connection alive. That is the shift, and once that shift happens, everything about your energy becomes unfamiliar to them. Because an avoidant is used to feeling in control of distance. They can sense when they are the one who can pull away and still be desired. They can sense when they still have emotional access to you, even if they are not showing up. They can sense when your heart is still waiting. And when you outgrow them, that access gets removed. Not with anger, not with drama, with absence, with neutrality, with a different frequency. It's like you used to be a door that stayed unlocked because you kept believing love meant leaving the light on. And now you're still kind, but the door is closed. That doesn't mean you're cruel. It means you're awake. So what does it look like? This silent shift that they can't ignore. It looks like you stop over-explaining. You stop defending your feelings. You stop trying to win the argument that never ends, the argument where your needs are too much, and their avoidance is just how they are. You stop offering emotional intimacy for free. You stop responding instantly to vague messages. You stop making their confusion your responsibility. You stop checking whether they've seen your story. You stop posting to provoke. You stop waiting for signs. You start living in a way that doesn't include them as the center of your emotional weather. And that is what they feel, because avoidants aren't blind. They might be disconnected from their emotions, but they are not disconnected from shifts in the environment. They can sense when the old dynamic is no longer available. They can sense when the person who used to keep the loop alive has stepped out of the loop. They can sense when your attention has moved away from them, because your attention used to be the thing that made them feel powerful without having to admit they needed power. And now your attention is back in your own life, and that changes the whole equation. This is why you don't need revenge. Growth is the revenge you never needed to plan. Not revenge like punishment, revenge like liberation. The avoidant felt safe when you were predictable. When you outgrow them, you become unpredictable in the best way. Not chaotic, not inconsistent, simply no longer available on demand. And that creates discomfort. Because the avoidant's comfort comes from knowing they can control closeness, they can drift and return, they can half commit and still be held. Your silent shift removes that safety. And suddenly, they feel something they hate, uncertainty. Now here's the crucial part that turns this from a motivational message into a life-changing truth. Your silent shift is not a performance. You don't outgrow them to make them miss you. You outgrow them because you finally see the cost of staying small. You finally see that waiting for someone to meet you halfway is a slow way to lose yourself. You finally realize that love without consistency is not romantic, it's exhausting. You finally understand that the relationship didn't just break your heart, it trained your nervous system to accept anxiety as normal. And you decide, quietly, that you're done paying that price. And that decision, even if you never speak it, changes your eyes, your tone, your patience, your boundaries, your availability, your responses, your entire way of being. They feel it because they used to feel you reaching. Now they feel you standing. They used to feel you hoping. Now they feel you knowing. They used to feel you waiting for them to choose. Now they feel that you have already chosen yourself. And when you choose yourself, you stop being the person who can be kept in almost. You become the person who requires real. They panic when you outgrow them because your growth removes the one ingredient that made their coping style work, your participation. People think avoidance panic because they suddenly realize you were the one. But most of the time, the first wave of panic is not romantic, it's nervous system shock. It's the sensation of losing control over distance. It's the sensation that their usual strategy, pull away, go quiet, become vague, return when convenient, is no longer producing the same outcome. And for someone who built their entire sense of safety around controlling closeness, that change feels like the floor shifting under them. To understand this, you have to see the avoidant pattern for what it really is, not a personality, a protection plan. Avoidance learned often early that depending on others can be risky. That closeness can come with disappointment, criticism, engulfment, or abandonment, so they built a system: stay self-contained, stay in control, keep emotional needs low, keep options open, don't get too exposed. In adult relationships, this system shows up as distance, deactivation, withdrawal, or sudden coldness when intimacy rises. But what makes that system work for them is not just their behavior, it's the other person's response. When you chase, explain, overgive, forgive too quickly, you remove the consequences of their withdrawal. You teach their nervous system that distance brings relief and still keeps love available. That's the perfect setup for an avoidant. They can regulate themselves through space and still keep connection as a safety net. When you outgrow them, you change that math. You stop rewarding distance with pursuit. You stop translating silence into space. You stop treating breadcrumbs like a comeback. You stop being the emotional shock absorber. You stop being the person who keeps the connection alive while they drift in and out. And now their protective system doesn't produce safety anymore. It produces loss. That's why they panic. Because the very thing they used to use to feel safe, creating distance, suddenly feels dangerous. The old button doesn't work. The old lever doesn't move anything. They pull away, and instead of you leaning in, you step back. They go quiet, and instead of you asking what's wrong, you get on with your life. They send a vague message, and instead of you flooding them with warmth, you respond calmly or not at all. Their nervous system reads this as I'm losing access. And that's the key word: access, not love. Access. Because before an avoidant can feel the romantic story, their body is feeling the control story. They're thinking, consciously or not, I used to be able to pull them back. I used to be able to disappear and return. I used to be able to keep things undefined. I used to be able to do the minimum and still be valued. And now they can't. That loss of control triggers anxiety. And avoidants hate anxiety. They will do almost anything to turn anxiety into control again. That's why you see the sudden increase in checking your socials, the hovering, the random contact, the accidental run-ins, the weird kindness, the jealousy they try to hide. They're trying to regain balance. They're trying to re-establish the old dynamic. They're trying to see if the door is still unlocked. But here's what you need to understand for your own protection. Their panic does not automatically mean they are ready. Panic can create pursuit, but pursuit fueled by panic is not the same as pursuit fueled by maturity. Panic says, I don't want to lose you. Maturity says, I'm ready to show up differently. Panic is about their discomfort. Maturity is about your experience. Panic wants relief quickly, late-night talks, intense emotions, promises, nostalgia, anything to calm the nervous system. Maturity moves slowly, respectfully, consistently, and it accepts boundaries without punishment. That's why outgrowing them is so powerful, because it forces the truth to surface. If they only want you back to stop their discomfort, they will push for closeness without accountability. They'll want the benefits without the repair. They'll want you to go back to being the old version of you, the one who made it easy for them to be avoidant. And this is the moment you stop making their panic your responsibility. Because your old self might have heard their anxiety and rushed to soothe it. Your old self might have thought, they're finally feeling something. I should be gentle. I should make it safe. I should show them I'm still here. But your outgrown self understands something deeper. You can be compassionate without being accessible. You can care without returning to the role that exhausted you. You can acknowledge their feelings without sacrificing your standards. Because the relationship doesn't need more emotion, it needs more stability. This is why your growth feels like an earthquake to them. You are no longer emotionally predictable in the way that served their avoidance. You are predictable in a new way. You are predictable in self-respect. You are consistent in boundaries. You are steady in your decisions. You are not pulled by their moods anymore. And that is what makes them feel it, because they can't control it. They can't manipulate it with silence. They can't pull you back with crumbs. They can't reset the connection with A. They feel your center, and your center tells them the old dynamic is over, the only way back is through real change. The third keynote is the one that stings in the most honest way, because it forces you to see what you were really doing in that relationship. You weren't just loving them, you were stabilizing them. You were the emotional cushion between them and the consequences of their own coping. You were the one who smoothed the rough edges of their withdrawal, who translated their silence into something tolerable, who absorbed the impact of their inconsistency so they didn't have to feel it. And you probably didn't call it stabilizing. You called it loyalty. You called it patience. You called it being understanding. You called it love. But the truth is, you became their regulator, and that role is powerful, exhausting, and invisible until you stop doing it. Think about the patterns. They could go cold and you would warm the connection back up. They could disappear and you would wait without making it too hard for them to return. They could avoid difficult conversations and you would carry the emotional weight in your own body while pretending you were fine. They could give you uncertainty and you would turn it into hope, because hope felt better than facing the possibility that you were being half-loved. You were constantly managing the relationship's temperature, always adjusting yourself so it wouldn't break. And that is exactly what a stabilizer does. They keep the system running even when the other person isn't contributing equally. Avoidants often don't recognize stabilization as something someone is doing for them, because when it's consistent, it feels like the environment. It feels like the air. It feels like normal. They don't notice how much emotional labor it takes for you to stay kind when you're confused, to stay patient when you feel dismissed, to stay open when you feel unsafe. They just experience the outcome. They feel less stressed after talking to you. They feel calmer after your reassurance. They feel soothed by your presence. They feel regulated by your steadiness. And then they tell themselves, I'm fine. Because the relief is real. But they don't connect the relief to you as a gift. They connect it to their independence, their control, their ability to detach. They think they are stable because they can shut down. Meanwhile, you are quietly holding the stability with your nervous system. That's why they can look so calm when they pull away. Because they have a coping mechanism that shuts feelings off. But what people miss is that your steadiness didn't just comfort them emotionally, it helped their entire life function more smoothly. When you were there, they had a safe emotional landing, even if they didn't admit they needed one. They had someone who remembered things, someone who checked in, someone who brought warmth, someone who offered forgiveness, someone who made their stress feel manageable, someone who softened the edges of their world. Your care became a stabilizing force, and the reason they feel it when you outgrow them is because that force disappears. The cushion is gone. This is where the consequences begin, not necessarily dramatic consequences, not instant collapse, but a subtle destabilization. They start feeling more irritable. They start feeling restless. Their distractions stop working as well. Their nervous system has to deal with life without the regulating effect of your presence. They might not call it missing you at first. They might call it boredom. They might call it stress. They might call it a slump. They might call it nothing feels right. But what's really happening is the system that kept them balanced has been removed. And now they have to confront their own emotional landscape without the buffer you provided. And this is where it gets personal for you, because when you realize you were the stabilizer, you also realize something else. You were doing too much. You were carrying more than your share. You were over-functioning in a relationship that under-functioned. You were compensating for their avoidance, and you became so good at it that you started confusing your effort with love itself. You started believing, if I just stay steady, they'll finally feel safe. You started believing your patience could heal their fear. You started believing that if you could just prove you weren't a threat, they would choose you fully. But here's the hard truth. The more you stabilize an avoidant who refuses to grow, the less they have to develop emotional responsibility. You become the reason their coping style can continue without consequences. That's why outgrowing them changes everything. Outgrowing them is not just leaving, it's stepping out of the stabilizer role. It's the moment you stop being the translator, the therapist, the shock absorber, the emotional home base for someone who won't build a home with you. And the moment you step out of that role, the relationship reveals what it actually was. If it only worked because you were stabilizing it, then it wasn't balanced love. It was a system of emotional labor. Now here's the empowering part. Because this keynote isn't meant to make you bitter, it's meant to make you free. If you were able to stabilize someone else like that, imagine what happens when that same steadiness is turned inward. Imagine what happens when you stabilize yourself, when you give your own nervous system the consistency you were giving away. When you stop chasing clarity and become clarity. When you stop trying to hold two people and finally hold yourself. That's when your life upgrades, because you stop handing your stabilizing power to someone who doesn't earn it. And if they come back, you'll see the difference instantly. Someone who misses your stabilization will try to restore access without repair. Someone who respects your value will show accountability, consistency, patience, and growth. Because your love is not a free service. Your steadiness is not a resource people get to use and discard. Your presence is not a cushion for someone who refuses to mature. When you understand you were the stabilizer, you stop begging to be chosen, because you finally see you were never the one lacking, you were the one holding everything together, and you deserve someone who holds you too. The fourth keynote is where the shift becomes visible, because once you outgrow them, they rarely come back with a clear, mature, "I was wrong and I want to rebuild." Most avoidants don't move like that. They move through testing, not through declaring. They don't walk straight into vulnerability, they circle it. They don't knock on the front door, they check the windows. And that's why their next move isn't a comeback, it's a test. Orbiting small messages, accidental contact, subtle reach-outs that give them connection without the risk of fully owning what they did. This is what it looks like. They start showing up in your digital space first, watching your stories, viewing your profile, liking something that feels too specific to be random, reacting to a post that wasn't meant for them. Or they suddenly remember something that gives them a reason to message, a meme, a song, a random "hope you're okay," a question they could have answered without you. They might ask mutual friends about you, casually, like they don't care. How are they doing? Are they seeing anyone? As if it's just curiosity. They might show up where you are, not dramatically, just conveniently, as if it's coincidence. And your heart wants to interpret this as love, because you've been trained to read crumbs as proof. But the reality is this behavior is often the avoidance way of checking one thing: do I still have access? Avoidants value control over closeness when they're dysregulated. Access gives them reassurance that they haven't truly lost you, while control protects them from the shame of admitting they want you. So they choose a low-risk approach, a test that lets them dip a toe in without committing their whole body. It's the safest kind of closeness where they can retreat instantly if they feel exposed. Because directness would require them to say something real. "I miss you. I regret leaving. I want another chance." And those sentences carry weight. Those sentences invite questions. Those sentences invite accountability. Those sentences require them to face the past and the damage. Orbiting doesn't. Orbiting lets them feel connected while staying protected. Now here's the part you need to hear, because it's where you get your power back. The test is not about you proving you're lovable. The test is about them seeing if the old dynamic is still available. If you respond the old way, fast, warm, eager, reassuring, you teach their nervous system, nothing has changed. I can still pull you back without doing the hard work. You reward the test. You hand them the same access they had before. And if they haven't grown, they will take the access, feel soothed, and eventually get overwhelmed again by closeness, and the cycle will repeat, because now they know the door still opens with minimal effort. This is why outgrowing them means your response to testing must be different. Not rude, not cold, not dramatic, just different. Because your new energy is the boundary. Your new energy doesn't chase vague contact. Your new energy doesn't turn hints into hope. Your new energy doesn't rush to comfort someone who hasn't repaired. Your new energy doesn't perform availability to be chosen. Your new energy holds a quiet standard. If you want access to me, you have to show up directly. That standard is the filter that reveals everything. And watch what testing often does to your nervous system, because this is where you can get pulled back in. When they orbit, your mind starts scanning. Are they thinking about me? Do they miss me? Should I respond? Should I post? Should I show them I'm okay? And suddenly your attention moves back to them. Suddenly you're back in the old loop, where your emotional weather depends on their behavior. That's why the test is so effective. It doesn't need to be a full return to steal your focus. It only needs to reopen the possibility. Because possibility is addictive. The maybe is addictive. The what if is addictive. And an avoidance orbiting often feeds that addiction in you. So the key is to treat testing as data, not destiny. It is information, not a promise. It tells you they feel the shift. It tells you they miss the access. It tells you they're curious. It tells you they're checking whether you're still emotionally open. But it does not tell you they are ready. Readiness shows up in directness, accountability, consistency, and patience. Readiness looks like them being willing to have the uncomfortable conversation. Readiness looks like them respecting your boundaries without trying to bypass them. Readiness looks like them showing up repeatedly, not just when they feel lonely or triggered. Testing often escalates when you stay grounded. If you don't respond like before, they might try a little harder, a slightly warmer message, a slightly more personal reach out, a little nostalgia, because they're trying different keys to see which one opens the door. And this is where you must protect your growth. Because outgrowing them means you no longer open the door for keys that used to work. You don't open it for nostalgia. You don't open it for a meme. You don't open it for I miss you, without ownership. You open it only for evidence. You open it for adult communication. You open it for consistency. Because here's the truth. A person who truly wants you back won't stay in testing forever. They will eventually have to choose directness. They will have to risk rejection. They will have to own what they did. They will have to step into accountability. And if they can't do that, then what they want isn't a relationship, it's relief. They don't want to rebuild, they want to re-access the comfort you used to provide. And your outgrown self knows the difference. Your outgrown self doesn't hate them. It just refuses to be available for anything that costs you your peace. The fifth keynote is the moment the power truly flips, because it's not just that they test you, it's that the old tricks stop working. And when the old tricks stop working, an avoidant doesn't feel calm, they feel exposed. They feel the one thing they've spent their whole life trying not to feel: uncertainty. And uncertainty is terrifying to someone who regulates themselves through control. This is why your new response, your calmer energy, your slower pace, your lack of chasing hits them harder than any argument ever did. Because arguing still keeps you engaged. Begging still keeps you attached. Explaining still keeps you in the loop. But when you don't respond like before, the loop breaks, and a broken loop creates panic. The old trick was simple: distance, vagueness. Pull away and watch you lean in. Withdraw and let you carry the emotional weight. Create confusion and let you chase clarity. That's how the dynamic stayed alive. Your nervous system would do the work of reconnecting. You would send the second text. You would ask what's wrong. You would soften your tone. You would apologize for being too much. You would accept half answers because any answer felt better than none. You would teach them unintentionally that they could disappear and still be held. And once an avoidant learns that, they can live comfortably in almost, because they never have to fully choose. They can keep one foot in and one foot out, and you will still be there to steady the connection. But outgrowing them means you stop doing that. It means when they go quiet, you don't panic. When they pull away, you don't chase. When they send a vague message, you don't pour your heart out. When they show up with nostalgia, you don't hand them emotional intimacy. Your replies become simple, calm, measured, or sometimes absent. Not to punish them, but because you're no longer available for the old dance. And this is where they feel real uncertainty for the first time, because their strategy depends on your predictability, and you are no longer predictable in the way that served their avoidance. This is why they start escalating. They might suddenly become nicer. They might suddenly become curious. They might suddenly become more present. They might show a level of attention you never got when you were together, and it can confuse you, because you'll think, why couldn't they do this before? They can do it now because the stakes are different. Before, they believed your love was guaranteed. Now they feel it's slipping. Before, they could regulate with distance and assume you'd stay emotionally available. Now distance doesn't calm them, it threatens them. So they try other strategies to regain control, to regain access, to regain certainty. You'll see it in small ways: more frequent check-ins, more hovering, more accidental contact, more indirect questions about your life, subtle jealousy, an urge to know whether you're seeing someone, an urge to remind you of memories, an urge to be the last person you think about before you sleep. They might even provoke you, because provoking you is also a form of control. If they can trigger your emotions, they can feel you still attached. They might say something slightly dismissive, slightly cold, slightly confusing, just to see if you'll react like before. Because your reaction is proof to them that they still matter. And if you don't react, if you stay steady, if you don't take the bait, they feel something they hate. They feel powerless. But here is the most important truth of this keynote: their panic is not automatically your invitation. Their uncertainty is not your responsibility to resolve. You are not obligated to soothe them because they are uncomfortable with the consequences of their choices. This is the part where many people relapse. Because you're a good person, you have empathy, and you think, I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to be cold. I don't want to be mean. And that empathy becomes the doorway back into the old role. You start replying more. You start offering reassurance. You start giving them emotional access again. And as soon as they feel regulated, as soon as they feel safe again, the avoidant system often returns to baseline, and baseline means distance. Baseline means less effort. Baseline means vagueness. Baseline means your needs feel like pressure again, and then you're back where you started, confused, waiting, carrying. So your power is to allow them to feel uncertainty without rushing to fix it. Because uncertainty is not cruelty, it's reality. They created uncertainty when they left. They created uncertainty when they withdrew. They created uncertainty when they treated closeness like a threat. And now they are finally feeling what you used to feel. That's not revenge. That's balance. And here's the mature, grounded reframe that protects you when old tricks stop working. You don't celebrate, you observe. You watch whether they respond to your boundaries with growth or with manipulation. Growth looks like directness, accountability, patience, consistent effort, respect for your pace. Manipulation looks like guilt, pressure, urgency, love bombing, vague promises, emotional fishing, disappearing when you ask for clarity. And you don't decide based on one moment, you decide based on patterns. Because patterns are the truth. The reason this keynote matters so much is because it proves something powerful. You were never trapped by their behavior alone. You were trapped by your old response to their behavior. And the moment your response changes, the entire dynamic changes. They feel it because they can't control it. They feel it because your steadiness removes their leverage. They feel it because your growth is now the boundary that keeps you safe. And once you've reached that place, you don't go back to being the person who can be pulled by silence. You become the person who only moves for evidence. The sixth keynote is the final payoff, the part where everything clicks, because after all the testing, the orbiting, the sudden warmth, the subtle panic, the escalation, you arrive at the most powerful truth of all. Outgrowing them isn't revenge, it's self-respect, and self-respect changes the rules. When you outgrow an avoidant, you don't become heartless, you become clear. You stop giving partner-level access to someone who can only offer part-time love. You stop calling inconsistency comp. You stop romanticizing distance. You stop treating crumbs like a meal just because you're hungry. And that shift is not about punishing them, it's about protecting you. This is where people misunderstand growth. They think growth means you stop caring, but real growth means you can care without collapsing. You can miss someone without reopening your wound. You can remember the good without erasing the bad. You can feel love without letting it override your standards. Because standards are not walls, they are filters. They don't keep love out, they keep dysfunction out. And when you finally outgrow an avoidant, you don't just upgrade your mindset, you upgrade your nervous system. Your body stops seeing chaos as normal. Your body stops being addicted to uncertainty. Your body starts craving steadiness, and once that craving becomes real, you become unreachable to half-love. Unreachable doesn't mean blocked, bitter, or rude. It means you no longer respond in ways that teach people they can access you without respecting you. It means you don't entertain vague messages that bypass accountability. It means you don't slip into late-night emotional intimacy that creates closeness without commitment. It means you don't accept, let's just see, when what you really need is clarity. It means you don't let someone re-enter your life as a comfort option while they remain emotionally unavailable. This is what self-respect looks like in motion, and it is the one thing that changes your entire dating life, because the moment you become unreachable to half-love, you become magnetic to people who are capable of full love. Now, here's the part that makes this a real ending, not a motivational quote. If they return, only evidence and consistency earn access. Not promises, not nostalgia, not guilt, not loneliness, not a sudden wave of sweetness. Evidence is behavior over time. Evidence is direct communication. Evidence is accountability without excuses. Evidence is a willingness to have the hard conversation without running. Evidence is respecting your boundaries without punishing you. Evidence is showing up when it's ordinary, not just when they're afraid of losing you. Because anyone can act different for a week when the fear of loss is high. But consistency requires capacity. It requires emotional adulthood. It requires the ability to tolerate intimacy without escaping. This is why your standards are the most loving thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for the relationship dynamic. When you set a standard, you create a reality check. You force the situation out of fantasy and into facts. In fantasy, an avoidant can return and feel good and tell themselves they've changed without actually changing. In facts, they have to demonstrate it. And facts are what keep you safe because your heart is powerful. Your heart will forgive quickly. Your heart will see the best in them. Your heart will want to believe. But your life cannot be built on your heart alone. Your life has to be built on your discernment. So the sixth keynote is a decision, a quiet internal decision that says, I will not confuse longing with compatibility. I will not confuse attention with commitment. I will not confuse missing me with being ready for me. I will not confuse a return with repair. I will not confuse chemistry with safety. Because those confusions are what kept you stuck. Those confusions are what made you accept a relationship that required you to shrink your needs. Those confusions are what made you work harder to keep someone who was not working hard to keep you. And when you make that decision, something incredible happens. You stop waiting for them to validate your growth by chasing you. You stop needing them to feel it. You stop needing them to regret it. You stop needing them to understand what they lost. Because you finally understand what you gained yourself. You gained your peace. You gained your time. You gained your clarity. You gained the ability to choose relationships that don't cost you your nervous system. This is why outgrowing them is not a loss, even when it hurts. It hurts because you're human, and you loved, and you hoped, and you imagined a future. But it's not a loss, because what you're actually doing is graduating from a pattern. You're graduating from being the one who carries, the one who chases, the one who explains, the one who waits. You're graduating from confusion. And when you graduate from confusion, you become someone who can recognize real love easily. Because real love doesn't require detective work. Real love is not a puzzle. Real love is not hidden in mixed signals. Real love is clear. So if they feel it, let them feel it. Let them feel your boundaries. Let them feel your calm. Let them feel your absence from the old dynamic. Let them feel that the version of you that used to accept half love is gone. Because that version paid too much. This version knows better. This version still has a heart, but it's guided by standards. This version is willing to be alone rather than be half-held. This version doesn't beg to be chosen, because this version chooses itself first. And that is the final truth. The moment you truly outgrow an avoidant is the moment you become loyal to yourself, and loyalty to yourself is the foundation of every healthy love you will ever build.